Welcome to the Hanu Health Podcast, where our mission is to help you to breathe better and stress less. On this show, we discuss a variety of topics and provide practical suggestions for improving health and well-being. However, none of the education, tips, and tricks provided should be taken as medical advice. Your medical doctor is your best bet if you have medical questions. Also, on this podcast, we interview numerous guests from diverse backgrounds, interests, and may carry some unique ideas. Hanu Health as a company does not endorse all statements provided by guests or condone all suggestions or protocols discussed. We just like hearing about cool people doing rad and new things. So sit back, relax, breathe, and enjoy the show. All right, Patrick. Here we are, man. I've been really excited about this opportunity to record the first episode of the Hanu Health Podcast. Did you do any fun prep work, as in body prep or mind prep? Do you do anything like that before podcasts, or do you kind of just jump on in and kind of whatever happens, happens?
I think just whatever happens, happens. Because if we plan too much, where's it going to go? And it's nice to keep it fluid. So yes, that's where it's at.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I'm always curious about people who do a lot of podcasting. I'm always wondering, are they doing a lot of meditation or prep work, or maybe, a shot of whiskey or something before they get on just to calm the nerves? I don't know. Because for me, I've done so many podcasts, but I just get really amped up before them because it's not nerves, it's excitement. It's my sympathetic nervous system turns on and says oh man, you're about to have a lot of fun. Let's get you in the go zone. And so I've tried to do some more, slow diaphragmatic breathing prior to podcasts, but I find that it's not nearly as exciting as amping myself up. So I just didn't know if you love to do some low and slow breathing prior to podcasting, if you're just nah, just should jump right on in.
Yeah, no, it's a different story now. If I was going on stage and you've got 200 or 300 people in front of you, then I have a preparation. That's what I work with. Podcasts I just allow it to happen, but it really is. I suppose it depends. It depends on energy levels, depends on sleep quality the night before, depends on how you're feeling, it depends on workload. So we all know that we want to get to that state where it's optimum delivery. Yeah, indeed. Last night, my son has been doing this thing where for some reason, my oldest, he wants to wake up at 1 and 3 a.m., 2 different times, and then just start calling for dad and mom. And I was like, kid, I've got an early podcast. I didn't tell him this, but I was thinking in my head. And so when I woke up this morning, I was like, okay, do I need to do a little bit more to revive some energy? But no, man, I got ready for the podcast and I'm good to go. But yeah, prior to going on to stage or doing something where you'll either be in front of a lot of people or you'll just be kind of in this high intense situation, may call for different means of self-regulation for sure. There's one thing about self-regulation. You always know it's there if you want to tap into it.
Love it. Yeah.
And it must be worse when somebody is going into a situation and they don't have any resources to fall back on. But I suppose if they don't have the awareness of where they are at in the first instance, and if you're working with the breath, if you're working with HRV, you kind of get an idea where you're at, and you know if you want to amp it or if you want to downregulate. So you have the tools at your disposal anyway. Pretty good tools to have, regardless of the situation, huh?
It's a beautiful way of putting it. I like to always conceptualize it in terms of having the ability to self-regulate is a matter of means of control over the nervous system at any given moment. And it's something that I think that we're innately built into us, but we lose it, and I won't say lose it, I should say we disconnect from it. And the reason we disconnect from it is because of all of these compounding life stressors, all these things that can get in our way. But if we kind of reunite with our ability to exercise control and utilize these tools at will, I think that is a prime means for success for us as human beings in helping to better regulate our stress response. And it's really going to be a lot of what we focus on this podcast. So, hey, I'm glad that you already jumped right into it, Patrick.
Yeah, no, for sure. I suppose if you think of the number of people in the corporate world, the number of people in media, and they're going into a situation and oftentimes panic takes over. And they don't have the means. This has been pretty much overlooked for decades. Now, there's some attention on it now because of technology and people are getting more into it. It really is. It's a key survival mechanism in today's modern world to be able to alter your states. And so that's where the conversation is going to be going.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And I always, and again, I'm close to it, you're close to it, but I still just see this as the lowest hanging fruit for health and well-being. And it's something that is far too often overlooked. I mean, we have a lot of, today's society who's looking for like, what is the quickest, most effective way? But that tends to be like them leaning towards supplements or medications or, whatever else it may be, biohacking. And it's not to say that some of these things can't be great as adjunctive type modalities or therapies, but really what's the most efficient and easiest way, the lowest hanging fruit, is us being much more in tune and aware with our body. We refer to this as interoception. And then also too, it is tapping in to, again, the closest thing that we have as human beings to a direct connection to our nervous system, which is breathing and breath work. And so if we can get anything across kind of within the context of this podcast, is that we're not writing off all of these ways of health optimization through biohacking, through, whatever means it may be, but we're just saying like, hey, let's start with the very basic foundation of what it means to be a human, which is breathing and self-regulation. And we'll use that as a kind of our baseline. That's kind of the foundation of the pyramid. And then we'll build on top of it. So with that said, I love that we've already kind of just dove straight into the deep end. Well, really not the deep end. That's more like the shallow end. We'll dive into the deep end. Welcome, everybody. Again, first episode of the Hanu Health Podcast. If you don't know who we are just yet, I'm going to provide an introduction to myself, and then I'll let Patrick provide an introduction to himself. But my name is Dr. Jay Wiles. I am the Chief Scientific Officer of Hanu Health, and I am a clinical health and performance psychologist, which is a fancy schmancy way of saying that I work with people who have dysregulated nervous systems and are really not the greatest at managing stress. And unfortunately, that typically just ends up being a lot of us in modern day society. I know here in the States, it's really bad, but it's bad everywhere. So I don't want to just say it's here in the US. But my goal kind of in life in general is to really help people to identify, use, and overcome stress. And again, that's going to be a primary focus of this podcast. It's kind of our motto, if you will. But it's really the intent of saying, I need to become better aware of my stress response. I need to be able to use stress when needed, because stress is not just this bad thing, this ominous kind of dark cloud that covers us, but it can actually be quite useful. And then also, too, it can be quite deleterious. It can be quite negative to our health. So how do we overcome it? And that is kind of my goal. So my background, again, human stress performance, human stress response, psychophysiology, and then also too, I'm a subject matter expert in heart rate variability. So a lot of my clinical practice, a lot of my consultative practice with my firm is in the field of heart rate variability as a biometric or proxy for the human nervous system and human stress response. And then I also work with just a lot of individuals, whether it be those from the kind of corporate world, the high performers, high-level CEOs, all the way down to just to the individual who's like, listen, I need some better help in regulating my stress response, which again is very diverse. It could be just about anybody. And, we wanted to really start this podcast as just kind of a good primer and a place to start to say, like, I need help with stress. I am not doing well on that end. I need to become more adaptive, more resilient to stress. And so we wanted to get this thing going. So I could, drone on and on about myself, but I also want Patrick, you now to introduce yourself. So take it, my friend.
Sure. I work with breathing. I've done so for 20 years. My background was working mainly with people with asthma and then with anxiety and panic disorder, sleep apnea, and working with children and adults, and also then bringing it into high performance. So my goal, I suppose, is really to get the awareness out there about breathing, going a little bit deeper, showing people really what the application is about the breath. I think it's being an area that has been absolutely overlooked and in the most part has been taught incorrectly, that the user has not got the full potential from changing breathing patterns because the instruction that was often imparted was not really, I would say, true or powerful to really give the user the full potential of it. So yeah, I think there's a massive potential in terms of changing your breathing patterns. And it's not just about taking that deep breath. And there's a few misconceptions out there, I'm sure as well, we'll be tapping onto how to breathe to open up your airways, your blood vessels, increase oxygen delivery, upregulate, downregulate, improve your sleep, in terms of asthma, what to expect, and different health conditions. But, that's what it's about. Simple breathing exercises that can be used by anybody, from a young child, 4 years of age, right up to an elderly person.
Yeah, indeed. I love that you already kind of hit on kind of how we're going to discuss and dispel some of the myths around breathing, because they're there. And, what's great, because of the work that you've done, the work of James Nestor, like breathing is really in the spotlight right now. And the problem is that a lot of people are coming out of the woodworks and they're providing kind of their own conception or their own kind of ideology around breathing and breath work. And so there's just a lot. It's very similar to like heart rate variability training. When it first came out, like people were super interested in it, and there was kind of only one or two theories or ideas behind it, and then kind of like it exploded, and then there was just like 1,000 different theories, and so people got really confused. They're like, well, I'm hearing one thing from one person, I'm hearing the other from the next, so like what is true? What does science have to say about it? Like what do we see as kind of like being kind of a more clear path as opposed to kind of like woo-woo fringy science? And so I would love to jump into some of those things in this podcast, just because there are so many people that write out to me. I'm sure they write out to you, Patrick, and they ask all these questions, and we're kind of like, man, yeah, there's just a lot of people who are lost in kind of knowing, what to do, when to do, why to do it, and where to do it type thing. And so I'm sure that you and I will have a blast kind of uncovering those things. The other thing that I must mention too, if you have not checked out any of Patrick's books, so Patrick is, and I know you didn't mention this, Patrick, so I'll brag on you a little bit. But he wrote The Oxygen Advantage. He also wrote The Breathing Cure. And is Atomic Focus officially out yet, or am I speaking too soon and we need our editor to knock that out of here?
No, it's out. It's out. Yeah,
beautiful.
It's out about a month or so.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't jumping the gun and we'd have to go back in reverse and have somebody edit it out. But yeah, so author of those books, which I have read all of them, and they are phenomenal. So if you haven't checked those out, we'll link it in the show notes, which again can be, I actually haven't even provided that link. It's at hanuhealth.com/1, because this is episode 1. Again, that's Hanu, which is HANU health.com/1. So I want to take just a little bit of time to provide, we kind of already did this, but I wanted just to spend a little bit more focused time talking about just kind of a description of who we are as a podcast, who we are as a company. The great thing that I have the privilege of doing is introducing you all to the world of Hanu Health. The one problem or downside I have to it is that for at least a while, I'm going to have to be fairly cryptic in what we are doing. But what I can tell you is that we are in the field of health psychology, and we are, I would say health technology. And then we are also, and health psychology is very much interconnected with what we're doing. But we also, too, are really focused on branding ourselves as kind of the go-to as a company, as individuals, and as a podcast for stress resiliency and adaptation. And it's not to say that there aren't other great avenues for stress resiliency and adaptation, but we are focusing on how can we leverage health technology to be kind of the forerunners in helping people to overcome stress and to identify stress and to use stress when needed. And so, again, a little bit more cryptic than what people probably want, but I will leave you all with bated breath. What you can actually do, if you are really interested and what we have going on, I would really invite you to join our mailing and wait list. You can head on over to hanuhealth.com/waitlist. That's hanuhealth.com/waitlist. And what you get with that privilege is, number one, you are going to get access to our newsletter. You're also going to get access to kind of like the first people to know about what's going on with this company. And should we provide something out there, we will provide incentives and promotions for it. And you'll be kind of like first on the list to get what we have coming out. So again, hanuhealth.com/waitlist. So I want to discuss now the format of the podcast. So Patrick is going to be joining me as the co-host of this podcast for our Q&A episodes. We're going to do about one a month for now, where again, you're going to be able to write us and ask us anything you want about stress resiliency, about breathing, about human optimization, which obviously though we're going to again focus more on that stress resiliency and adaptation component. And so if you have questions for us, head on over to hanuhealth.com/podcast. That's hanuhealth.com/podcast. And feel free to write us and ask us anything you'd like. And hopefully we will get to your question here on one of our podcasts, and you can provide, not just help for you as the person asking the question, but also provide help to every listener here. So again, that's going to be kind of the format when Patrick is here. And then when it's just me, which is going to be the podcast that's going to be released every other Friday, and I should say every Friday. I meant other as in not the Q&A podcast. Every single Friday, I'm going to be interviewing the leading guests in their respective fields on the subject matter of breathing, stress resiliency, human optimization, and performance. And we're really going to just get a diverse group of individuals here. And this is going to consist of the advisors that are a part of Hanu Health as a company, but also too, just individuals that are really passionate about helping to improve the health and well-being of others. And again, we're going to focus on how kind of their modality, how their background is really important and effective in stress adaptation and stress resiliency. So with that said, one of the fun things that I wanted to do with you, Patrick, because I think that, and we were talking off air about this just a minute ago, is a lot of people are very curious about what our own daily practices are. So what are the things that we do as a part of our daily routine, and especially in our respective fields? So again, me as an expert in heart rate variability and the human stress response with breathing as a component of that, and you as a breathing expert, what are our actual normal daily practices? So I've been talking for a while, so I won't go first. I'll actually let you go, Patrick. But I was wondering if you could just break down what is it that you do in terms of health practices, but even especially so the breathing practices on a daily basis.
Yeah, I suppose breathing for me, I have to bring it into my way of life. Back in the early noughties, I used to do formal practice every day, set time aside, and I could get an hour in, 90 minutes in it per day. Nowadays, I don't do it so much formally. Probably workload is very high, but I bring it in with physical exercise. And I think it's really important for all of us to take our attention out of the mind and onto the breath and slow down breathing at different parts throughout the day. I remember doing a Vipassana course going back about 15 years ago. And I was kind of, intrigued. There were people there. I was working at it. After you do a couple of courses, you can be working in the kitchens and assisting. And I was intrigued. Some people had wonderful posture and they had all the robes and the paraphernalia and they looked absolutely wonderful. And I was saying, these people really looked the part of meditation. And next thing is, when we went into the kitchen, they were all over the place. And I couldn't help wondering, how come they're able to practice it so well in a formal setting? And the benefits of that should carry over to when they're not practicing it. But for these people, it wasn't happening that way. So for me, it's really important to take attention out of the breath, out of the mind and onto breathing and slow it down. And if I'm doing physical exercise, it's always in and out through the nose. I'll do my normal warm-up routine. I'll do some breath holds to lower blood oxygen saturation. I wear tape on my mouth, and people might say, well, why on earth does he have to wear tape in his mouth 20 years later? That's just the way it is. I suppose it made such a big difference to my own sleep, and I just kept going with it, and as a result, then it's my own crutch. So, yeah, taping my mouth is one thing I do. Every single night. It's kind of weird, but it works for me. And as soon as I put the tape on, I start feeling sleepy and I'm heading up.
Man, you're conditioned, man.
Yeah, it's one of those trigger responses, And last night I had leaf HRV and I was doing a bit of experimentation while just watching some stuff on TV. And you know what? That's breath work is part of me. So yeah. And the other thing, Jay, is how on earth are we expecting people to bring this into their way of life? People are so busy. People have to do physical exercise. They have to do breath work, they have to do this, they have to do that. Whereas the one thing about breath is that you have it with you all day long. All you have to do is tap into it. And even if you're tapping into it for 5 minutes, it's still a lot better than nothing at all.
No, it's so true because, again, we all live fast-paced lifestyles. And I mean, if you're anything like, myself, I've got 2 boys, I'm running, business, doing a lot of education, podcasting. And so like things can really get packed in. Like, I don't have time in my schedule, and I'm not going to expect anybody else that I'm working with to allot, an hour, 2 hours, to breathing practice. It's just not sustainable. And so I don't want to, get people started on something like that, or even necessarily promote something like that, because people are going to become really frustrated and discouraged if they try to implement, an hour worth of breathing practice or breath work, and then just feel like, oh my goodness, look at me, another thing that I'm failing out, I'm not succeeding. And then guess what? Their stress response is turned on, and then they feel the deleterious effects of that. And so I'm like, I don't really kind of want to, provide something that is supposed to be helpful to then cause stress. So I'm totally there with you. So for you, it sounds like, Patrick, that, you did a lot of that kind of, hour, set aside formal practice before, but now you see kind of a lot of benefit in kind of conditioning the nervous system and conditioning breath work kind of throughout the day, kind of whenever, it becomes more interoceptive and you kind of sense the need for it, or you become aware of it, as opposed to just saying like, okay, I've got, etched in my calendar, I wake up at 6 a.m. and then I start a, hour-long breath practice. Is that right?
Yeah, no, there's one thing that I need to get in every day, and it's physical exercise. So I got it in today. Yesterday I wasn't able to get it in, just with workload. If I can get in a half an hour to an hour of physical exercise every day, bring in breath work into that, and then at different times throughout the day is to merge with my own breathing, or if I've got downtime in the evening, focus my attention on the breath. And, for me, it's not just about paying attention to breathing, but it's altering breathing. It's not just about mindfulness, but it's actually changing breathing patterns to change states. And as I said, it's a great tool that you can always fall back on. And, it came up in a conversation earlier on, like people are probably saying, well, how do I know if it's for me, or how do I know if I'm stressed, or how do I know what exercise to put into practice, or what benefits can I get? The very basic starts with nose breathing. And for me, that was a game changer, both during the day, during physical exercise, during sleep. And I'm not an athlete by any means of the imagination, and nor am I a yogi, and nor am I the most serene person in the world. We're all human beings. And it really, I suppose, it gives us a sense of calmness and an ability to have control over the mind as well. And if we want to have control over the mind and to create gaps between thoughts and enter flow states and to have the energy levels that we really need to be productive, we need to tap into the breath. And, I think that's where it's at. And it has been overlooked, Jay. And that's what your podcast is going to be great at, helping to get it out there.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. It's a great take home point. Like if anybody is like, okay, so what's the practical take home point right here? It's number one, like if you could take away anything from this, first podcast, at least for right now, because I think we got a lot of great nuggets that we'll get into when we get to the Q&A. It's just number one, being more aware of the breath. And then number two, like just try to switch over to nasal breathing. And so many people don't realize, especially if they're like someone like me. So I do a lot of talking throughout the day. I'm on the phone a lot. I'm on calls a lot. I'm podcasting right now. It's really easy for me to get into the habit of just kind of breathing through my mouth and not breathing through my nose. And I can even, sense myself doing it right now, even when I'm podcasting. And that's something that I have to be aware of. I have to focus on. And it's, one of the things that I'm going to commit to, continue to work on. But I think that if people can just really focus on how can I switch from mouth breathing to nasal breathing only, it's just an extremely low-hanging fruit. And I know you're a huge proponent of that. I know that James Nestor, obviously a huge proponent of that. It's just switching to the to the nasal pathway.
Yeah, but maybe people are asking though, why? I remember I was at a medical conference in Chicago going back, I don't know, it's about 5 or 6 years ago. Professor of medicine stood up and he said that it doesn't make any difference whether you breathe through your nose or whether you breathe through your mouth. That's simply not the case. If we talk about human beings, what does the mouth do in terms of breathing? Is there any function that the mouth does? If you stand in front of a mirror, open your mouth, look into your mouth and ask what part of the mouth is engaging with the breath. And the answer is none. So the mouth has absolutely no function whatsoever. It's simply a hole. And it's a hole whereby air can go straight down your throat into your lungs. The mouth has no purpose, and the nose has all of the purposes. And I suppose Jay, there's purposes here that we haven't even gave credit for. You know, there was a study that came out in Israel 2020. Visuospatial awareness is more effective with nasal breathing than mouth breathing. Memory and attention span is more effective with nasal breathing than mouth breathing. We select our mates, our partners, based on nasal breathing and a sense of scent. And also there's a primordial fear response, sniffing out danger. That's not sniffing out through the mouth, of course, because the mouth doesn't sniff, but it's through the nose. So there's something innate and something highly intelligent about the human nose and how connected the nose is to the brain, that it's also there to protect us. And socially, you know, how did society regard mouth breathers? Well, they regarded them as pretty stupid people and unintelligent. I can say this because I was a mouth breather for 20 years, so don't worry, I'm not insulting anybody listening to me. If you have your mouth open, this is not directly aimed at you.
Everybody just close their mouth.
It's one reason.
It's great.
And, you know, for sleep and for dental health, and, you know, if you have your mouth open, you're breathing upper chest and you're more likely to be in that hyperarousal or stress response. Mouth breathing reduces oxygen uptake in the blood. You don't get optimal movement of the diaphragm. And it just looks pretty dumb anyway.
It does.
There's plenty of reasons. Nose breathing is where it's at.
You know, my oldest son is 3.5, and one of the things that we've been working with him, because, you know, I'll catch him, like, if he's sitting on the couch or, you know, and again, I don't want to make it, I don't want people to call, like, DSS on me or Child Protective Services thinking like I'm abusing my kid because I'm watching him do this. But I'll just notice, you know, every once in a while, like, he'll be watching TV and the mouth will just be kind of wide open and he's just really not focusing kind of on his breathing through his nose. Like, it's just kind of like the mouth's open, he's breathing through his mouth. And so, like, some of the times I'll just kind of go over to him and he knows what's coming, like when I start this sentence. And I always look at him and I'm like, hey, buddy. I'm like, hey, remember what we said? Mouths are for what? And he'll be like, mouths are for eating and noses are for breathing. And it's always funny because, like, we'll just say that every once in a while. But even him just, like, learning that statement has him more focused on it. And he'll say, you know, noses are for breathing, mouths are for eating. And I think that I know it's very simplistic, but I don't think it's an oversimplification, right? I mean, that's how it is. Like, the only time really I find myself mouth breathing is if I am engaged in super high intensity exercise. So if I'm doing HIIT training, like if I, you know, am running, you know, 10 plus miles and I'm doing, you know, let's say like a 7-minute mile, you know, sub 7-minute mile, like I might find myself later on, like every once in a while engaging in a mouth breath, but not that often. Even still, I've been trying to really train myself. But I've noticed that if you want to significantly reduce sports performance, if you want to significantly increase stress, if you want to significantly reduce cognitive performance and optimization, breathe through your mouth. Like, just breathe through your mouth and you will suffer the negative effects of all of those. And again, we're going to jump in more to kind of, you know, what's happening physiologically, because I know question 1 really hits on kind of the nasal breathing aspect. But, you know, I think it's just a great reminder that just because, you know, we might have been reconditioned to do something different than what we're innately born to do, doesn't mean that we can't kind of find our way back home and really come back to kind of what we have been built and evolved to do in terms of breathing. So with that said, I'm actually just wondering, Patrick, for you, like when you exercise in your nasal breathing, are you normally doing like endurance work or like strength or resistance training? Like, what does that look like for nasal breathing?
Yeah, it's typically treadmill. Nothing too fancy. Just going for a jog, going for a run, and upping the gears, and then, you know, moving down through the gears. I always will maintain nasal breathing, so pretty much. And my nose is battered. You know, growing up in a tough town in Ireland, you get knocks as you're growing up.
Yeah.
So I don't have the perfect shaped nose either. So sometimes I'll wear a nasal dilator, which will help open up the nose. And it's really your ability to nasal breathe during physical exercise is influenced by a couple of things. One is the length of your bed hold time and how you breathe during rest, how you breathe during sleep, and the size of your airway as well. So if you have, for example, somebody who's mouth breathing during sleep, there are 6 or 8 hours that they are breathing hard and fast, and that can impact their breathing during physical exercise. And also, how they are breathing during the day is going to influence how you breathe during physical exercise. So when you're talking about endurance exercise, you know, we should be thinking about breathing efficiency, and we should be thinking about breathing economics and understanding what's the optimal way to breathe in order to enhance gas exchange from the lungs into the blood, and also for oxygen to be delivered from the blood to the tissues. So nasal breathing, I suppose, Jay, is somewhere where everybody can start during physical exercise. And bring a tissue with you the first few times you're going to do it. Your nose is going to run. You've been forewarned. So bring your tissue. And just bear in mind that the air hunger that you experience when you first switch to nose breathing is going to be a little bit stronger. This is normal. And this just means that carbon dioxide is increased in the blood. It's not that your oxygen levels have dropped, because in actual fact, when you breathe through your nose during physical exercise, there's increased oxygen delivery from the blood to the tissues. And even though you are feeling air hunger, your body is going to be better oxygenated. The reason being is because the air hunger signifies that carbon dioxide is increased in the blood. And then when you look at the role of carbon dioxide, it's a catalyst for the release of oxygen from the red blood cells to the tissues and organs. So don't worry about the air hunger. But don't push yourself at an intensity that it's absolutely excruciating. It's not about forcing air in and out through the nose. It's about comfortable breathing, maintaining nasal breathing, and letting your nose dictate the intensity of exercise that you perform.
Hey, Jay here. Hate to interrupt this show, but I have to tell you about our amazing sponsor for today's episode. Yeah, it's Hanu Health. That's Hanu Health, my company. And I've got good news and I've got bad news. So the bad news is that I'm going to have to be quite cryptic for a while as to what we're building. But what I can say is that it is in the space of health technology, and it's going to be revolutionary. Just think about this show. You have myself, who is an expert in heart rate variability, and Patrick, who is an expert in breath work, and he is one of our primary advisors. And what's the good news? Well, even though you have no idea about what the company is offering as a product, we are offering an exclusive VIP waiting list so that you can be the first to know about it. Not only will you reserve your spot in line, you will also gain access to our informative newsletter. We will update you on where we are as a company and provide special incentives and promotions. All you need to do is go to hanuhealth.com/waitlist. That is hanuhealth.com/waitlist. I promise you will not want to miss out on what is to come. We are building the biohacker's dream, but it will be useful for every human being on this planet. I'm not even speaking in hyperbole. I'm serious. Every human could benefit from what we are making. So again, head on over to hanuhealth.com/waitlist to get your spot now, and I will just, leave you with bated breath. Now back to some killer Q&A. One of the interesting things when I started nasal breathing while exercising, it's been a few years now, one of the first things is I didn't realize how often I was breathing from my mouth when I was going on a run. I mean, even in a really easy like zone 2 heart rate run, like I was almost solely breathing through my mouth, and I never realized that until I started focusing on that. And the other thing that I think that was probably even more interesting is that I would take these breaths through the nose. This was again when I was transitioning from mouth breathing to nasal breathing during a workout. I would take these breaths through the nose, and I would be so hyper focused on how stressful it was. Like I'd be like, oh my goodness, this is the hardest thing ever. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do it. And then I was like, Jay, like utilize kind of the skills about like fully embracing and being in the moment and just allowing, because my body was tensing up. Like I was, my throat was tensing up, my nasal pathways were tensing up, and so I allowed myself just to really relax into what I was doing, knowing that, yes, it's difficult. It's like if anybody's ever done, let's say like, a CO2 table or like a breath hold table, like it can feel excruciating at times, to hold your breath. This is different what we're talking about now. There is benefit to holding your breath while running, but we won't jump into that just yet. But one of the things that I just kind of really said is like, it's kind of like that old notion of like, embrace the suck. Just allow yourself to adapt, allow yourself to kind of just be in the moment environment, to be right there connected to it. And things got a lot easier. And again, I think the best benefit I found is that performance increased. And I didn't feel like after a run, like I would get into to my office. I normally kind of come into my office after I shower, and like my mouth and throat would be so incredibly dry. And like I would just feel like cooped out for the rest of the day. Like I couldn't do anything. I'm like, I just feel like I've expended all this energy, got a dry mouth, dry throat, and I don't feel like energized or vitalized, which it's so funny because now when I do that, if I go out for a 10-mile run nowadays, like I will come back and I will actually feel just pumped up and ready to go, which is very different than when I was mouth breathing and running. Is that something you've heard from like athletes? Like, have they had a similar experience to what I've had there?
Yeah, many. It's a very common feature. People say the recovery is much better, that after finishing physical exercise, that they often feel like they could go back out again. This is, I suppose, the most simplest thing. We have to think about our ancestors, and you hear all of the stories that, say, for example, we were in a very hot environment, and one of the rituals for a boy when he was to become a hunter was to take a mouthful of water and to run a distance and to reach the destination and spit out the mouthful of water. And you could think, well, this is kind of a strange ritual. But then again, is it really that strange? Because if we went for a run in a very hot environment, we are going to be very dehydrated quickly, and it could spell life or death. So, our ancestors were innate nasal breathers. The animal kingdom are innate nasal breathers, with the exception of a dog, which just uses its mouth to regulate body temperature. But of all species, human beings are the only ones that have forgotten about the importance of breathing through the nose. But when you look at the skulls of human beings going back maybe, centuries ago, you will always be able to determine that they were nasal breathers by virtue of the development of their head and their maxilla, which is their top jaw. Because basically they were mouth closed, tongue resting in the roof of the mouth, and this helped to direct forward growth of the jaws and a wide facial structure, which is conducive to nasal breathing. So we know throughout our evolution that the nose is where it was at. It has got lost. I think, Jay, it just hasn't got a whole lot of attention, with the exception of a few sports medicine scientists. One would be George Dallam from, I think it's Evansville University in the United States. He's pretty interested in it. And he has put this to the test with 10 recreational athletes. He got them to breathe through their nose for 6 months, and he measured their efficiency after 6 months of nasal breathing. And pretty much they were able to maintain 100% of their work rate intensity with nasal breathing as with mouth breathing, but they had 22% less ventilation. Now, this is interesting because, and also the fraction of expired oxygen was less with nasal breathing. The respiratory rate was reduced with nasal breathing. I think it was 39 breaths per minute versus 49 breaths per minute. Carbon dioxide was higher in the blood with nose breathing, was 44 millimeters of mercury versus 40 with mouth breathing. So there's an efficiency here. If you can do the same physical exercise with 22% less ventilation, that's an economical saving, because there's an energy cost associated with breathing. And for endurance athletes, it must really be, attractive or a promising potential here. And yeah, it would be great to see more research. But like, coming back to it, it is tough at the start. Go a little bit slower. And the air hunger diminishes after about 5 or 6 weeks. If you do all of your physical exercise breathing in and out through your nose, you'll soon be able to maintain a pretty decent intensity with nasal breathing as with mouth breathing. But all of those things that Jay spoke about, you'll have a better recovery, your mouth is moist, even dental health, which is poor, and it can be poor amongst runners, and it can be related to the distances that they run every week, because of course a dry mouth is more conducive to dental cavities, gum disease and bad breath. So for the sake of that, let's get the mouth closed.
Right. So again, if you haven't been sold on at least some of the effects of nasal breathing, then I'm not sure what else we can tell you. So that's what we have there. I wanted to wrap up this section here, just talking a little bit about kind of what I do on a normal basis as well. I'll try to keep it rather quick. But again, like the people ask me, like, do you practice heart rate variability training? Do you track heart rate variability? Do you breath work every single day? And the answer to that is yes, I do every one of those things every single day. But very similar to you, Patrick, I just do not have the time to allot, an hour, 2 hours worth of practice anymore like I used to. So kind of actually pre-kids was when I had the ability to, sit down and do a lot more, focused meditation, focused breath work, focused heart rate variability training. And I still like to do that every once in a while. But for me, I have found that, again, the lowest hanging fruit has been, number one, being more just aware of kind of when my body is experiencing a stress response. So again, I use the word interoception a fair amount, which again is being much more aware of the physiological responses to stress within the body itself. So I'm very alert of when my heart rate increases. I'm very alert when I hold muscular tension, especially in my shoulders and in my traps and in my neck. And then also too, I'm just also very aware of my galvanic skin response. So when my hands start to become a little bit clammy, when I start to sweat a little bit more. And again, like I have utilized mechanisms to become a lot more interoceptive, such as number one, training, and number two, utilizing either biometric, data points and wearables. These things have been really helpful. But the great thing is now is that I've become my own biofeedback machine. And I love that kind of concept of kind of like, still continuing to leverage technology, but also kind of being kind of the first alert system within the body to recognize when stress has kind of hit the fan. And I can pretty much, without fail, notice when I'm stressed, throw on a heart rate monitor or something that is assessing for heart rate variability and be pretty close to kind of guessing where I'll be in terms of biometrics. And again, that's just me learning my body. Now, I do check heart rate variability every single morning. So I'll throw on a Polar H10 chest strap and I'll check heart rate variability just from a sports performance perspective, but also too from an orthostatic baseline perspective, just to kind of see like how well I've recovered over the night. And then also too, kind of what I'm primed for the day. And I don't use this, like I love to kind of both integrate the subjective experience of stress and objective data together. I never try to single out one and say, well, oh, my objective data, my HRV says this, so therefore my day is now dictated based solely on this data. No, I say, well, how do I subjectively feel? And then how can I then combine that with the objective data? And that's one thing that I really like to drive home for people who are listening to this podcast who are interested in heart rate variability and the human stress response, is to say that you do not need to solely dictate everything you're going to do on biometric data. It's very helpful. It's very informative. It's a great proxy. But what's even more of a proxy is how do you subjectively feel? And then we take that information, we combine it with the objective data, and then we make the decisions on how we're going to kind of basically focus our day. So if I notice that I'm stressed, I wake up stressed, my heart rate variability is lower, then, I'll engage in more breath work throughout the day, more heart rate variability training throughout the day. And it's typically, like you mentioned, Patrick, more informal practice. So I'll go throughout the day and just really focus on low, slow breathing. Increasing kind of the time duration or the cadence of breathing, so slow it down, and then also too just focus on doing some breath holds as well. I find that is probably single-handedly the biggest de-stressor for me. And I know a lot of people ask, well, like how long do you hold your breath? Like you're doing minute, 2-minute breath holds, and the answer is no. I mean, for me, it's typically anywhere from about 10 to 15 seconds is my sweet point for stress reduction. I'll hold for about that long, and for me, it just eases the mind. I'll do that for about 5 minutes or so, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And I just find that it is such a great reset to my day, such a great reset to what I'm doing. And so that's kind of my go-to. Now there's some, reduced cadence breathing, 5 breath per minute, 6 breath per minute, cadence of breathing, doing some breath holds. And then also too, like you said, Patrick, exercise. So I do a lot of zone 2 training. So if people aren't familiar with zone 2, I know that Dr. Peter Attia talks a lot about this. He had a guy on his podcast called Inigo San Milan, who is a researcher in Zone 2, but it's basically a low heart rate, low intensity level of exercise that is supposed to help with cellular respiration and mitochondrial functioning, and is much more of a aerobic instead of anaerobic type exercise. So for me, I do that about 3 times a week, 4 times a week, and then I do that nasal breathing only. So I keep my heart rate generally around 150 to 155-ish. And again, that's kind of right at the point to where it becomes fairly uncomfortable to nasal breathe. If I go above like a 160 in heart rate, then I just know, number one, I'm out of zone 2 heart rate. And then I'm also, it just becomes increasingly difficult to nasal breathe. So that's what I use. I mean, I have a heart rate monitor that I wear, but I utilize that kind of as a predominant proxy. And then the other thing that I do on a normal basis that's really a part of kind of, I guess, my level of expertise is that I do heart rate variability training. And again, I used to do it for long periods of time, but now I just do it for short periods of time. So I'll either put on a device, or a lot of times, again, I have the access to really research grade, clinical grade equipment here at my office, and so I'll hook myself up and do some heart rate variability training. And a lot of people ask, okay, so what does that actually look like practically? And really what it is it's utilizing and leveraging technology, watching heart rate variability as the main proxy for nervous system change, and then just changing breathing and changing breathing patterns, slowing down breathing, and nasal breathing only. And so I find those, again, as being like my lowest hanging fruit, the things that I do on a quote unquote normal basis, and can be quite effective for me. So there's other things, but I won't bore you with kind of everything I do. I'm sure at some point in this podcast, you'll hear a lot about kind of what I do, what Patrick does, and all the beautiful things there. But I think it's probably now time for us to turn over to the Q&A. What do you think, Patrick?
Sure, let's go for it.
All right. So, again, these questions do not come from Patrick or I. These come from our listeners and listeners like you guys. So I wanted to first, again, just remind everybody, if you are interested in submitting a question to us, we are going to post on social media to allow for you to write kind of your question to Patrick and I there. So you can, go to, at Hanu Health is going to be the predominant place where we'll post that. So follow us on Instagram at Hanu Health, HANU Health. So that's a great place to go. And then also too, if you want to go to our website, obviously get signed up for our wait list, but go to hanuhealth.com/podcast to submit your question. We've got 4 of them today. We'll kind of monitor time to see if we get through all 4. But let's jump on into them. I think these are some really good, just kind of like Kickstarter questions. So the first one is from Alexandra. She asks, I understand the benefits of nasal breathing, but there are a lot of people who say you should inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. So first, do you agree with that? And what would be the purpose of nasal breathing only? So I'll just first start and say, Patrick, that this is a really interesting question to me, because when I was getting trained in heart rate variability biofeedback, that was the notion. You inhale through the nose and then you exhale through pursed lips out the mouth. And that was kind of like this is kind of the industry standard. We found this to be the most effective means of breathing. And then the more and more I got to kind of learn about why we should breathe nasally and nasally only, I started to change my mind and started to realize too that the research was not definitive on saying that you should exhale through the mouth. So let me ask you this, Patrick, do you agree that you should inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth? And then if not, why should we be nasal breathing only?
I suppose if you're just doing an exercise and it's for a brief period of time and you want to breathe in through your nose and exhale with pursed lips, that's fine. By exhaling with pursed lips, it's probably bringing more attention onto the breath. You're feeling the breath as it's leaving the body. And also, you're generating a negative pressure so that when you're breathing out through pursed lips, and what I mean by that is that you're restricting the airflow that's going out of the mouth. And this in turn then is going to change the pressure of the air in the lungs. And this may help to open up the airways. So pursed lip breathing is often used for people with respiratory issues. It's an interesting one. You know, nature doesn't do it. You never see a cow in a field breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. You don't see a horse do it. You don't see any animal do it. You don't see an infant do it. I don't think we did it, you know, throughout our evolution. I think it could be a common enough one where it originates in a very hot country such as India, because we can get rid of heat from the body through the breath. Now, the only downside to that is you're going to get rid of moisture as well. There's a 42% greater water loss when you breathe out through the mouth. So I suppose, Jay, a short-term practice, why not? But it's not something that we should be doing or thinking about. The nose imposes a resistance to breathing that's 2 to 3 times that of the mouth, and the length of the exhalation should be about 1.5 times the length of the inhalation during rest. So during rest, the inhalation is active and the exhalation is passive, and allow the air to leave the body effortlessly. A very slow and relaxed exhalation, allowing the diaphragm to move back up to its resting position, and that would be pretty good. So whether you do it through the nose or mouth, personally I'll do it through the nose. You may do it through the mouth for a brief period of time. That's fine.
Yeah, interesting. I guess theory behind why they told me you should do pursed lips, you know, when we were practicing biofeedback training, is because, again, like you kind of mentioned, it's kind of the mindfulness approach to the switch in breath. Like if we're switching back and forth from nasal to mouth breathing and doing so through pursed lips, well, yes, we're causing more resistance by doing pursed lips as to opposed to not, which is good. But then also too, because it slows us down. In our breathing, but also too, it's just like if we are having to conscientiously switch from nasal to mouth breathing, then we're going to be much more mindful to stick with our breath as opposed to maybe allow our mind to wander or kind of move away from our practice. So I see merit in that. However, what I have noticed anecdotally, both for myself and working with clientele, is that if you do nasal breathing only, I think it's because of the mass resistance that you experience out of the nasal pathway as opposed to the mouth, that pooling of CO2 that you get can enhance the stress resiliency effects. And again, maybe I'll punt this one to you, Patrick. It seems like too that you would think that if you're having a more increased pooling of CO2 because of the resistance out of the nose, that's going to increase the efficacy of the Bohr effect. Am I right on that, or am I off base?
Yeah, no, it's like carbon dioxide is going to be, if you have a nice relaxed and prolonged exhalation, carbon dioxide is going to be increasing in the blood. You'll kind of know it if you feel a little bit of air hunger, especially towards the end of the exhalation. And the increased carbon dioxide, it lowers blood pH, and hemoglobin, which is the main carrier of oxygen, will release oxygen more readily. And it's probably this that's also playing a role in stimulating the vagus nerve. So that added kind of response in terms of bringing the body into balance. So yeah, I suppose one thing I forgot to mention earlier on, Jay, was that if you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, you lose heat and moisture from the breath. And the loss of heat and moisture by exhaling out through your mouth will cause your nose to be more stuffy. So if somebody, say, for example, has rhinitis, or if they have hay fever, and if they want to open up their nose, the best way to help keep your nose decongested is to use it and to breathe both in and out through your nose, not to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, because if you breathe in through your nose and out through your nose is more liable to be stuffy, and if your nose is more liable to be stuffy, then you're more likely to mouth breathe. But also mouth breathing during sleep, big problem in terms of a lighter sleep and increased risk of sleep disorders.
Yeah, I think one of the takeaway points from this question, which great question, Alexandra, is I like this idea of like there being able to, us being able to acutely or transiently change our practice to exhale through the mouth. But the problem is that there's not a lot of increased, if any, I don't think there is any increased benefit. It may be potentially, excuse me, to our detriment. And here's kind of my thoughts on it, is that I kind of see every focused breathwork practice that I'm doing as being a means of conditioning my informal practice or my everyday kind of like unfocused practice where my body is just kind of doing what it is being conditioned or trained to do. So the more I train my practice conscientiously to breathe in through my nose and out through my nose, the more often I'm going to have that response occur when I'm not consciously thinking about it. So again, it's not to say that you're going to wreck, your nervous system, you're going to wreck your your conditioned response if you, engage in some exhalations through pursed lips through the mouth. The problem though is I think that if you want to optimize your chances of conditioning the response of nasal breathing, inhale and exhale, then it's probably just best to do it kind of as your mainstay practice. So that's kind of my thought on it. I think that there are some arguments for what you said of vagal modulation because of the pooling of CO2. We know this, but also too vagal modulation from nasal breathing in and of itself. One of the things too that we haven't hit on is kind of the increase in nitric oxide through the inhalation of the nose. And so I'm wondering, Patrick, if you could kind of just speak to the benefits of nasal breathing from a nitric oxide standpoint and a nervous system or stress resiliency standpoint, because I think a lot of people actually overlook that we can increase nitric oxide in the body through nasal breathing.
Yeah, it's a very important gas. First identified in the human breath in 1991. So not really, I suppose it's still in its infancy yet. It's very pertinent nowadays with COVID because nitric oxide is antiviral, it's antibacterial. And by breathing through the nose, it could help to reduce viral load. And it's really the first, it's part of the immune system. And it's the first, breathing through the nose is the first defense of the body as air is entering into the lungs. The mouth is pretty much no defense. Nitric oxide is redistributing blood throughout the lungs. Nitric oxide is a bronchodilator. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. It's opening up the blood vessels in the lungs for better gas exchange to take place. So it may be because of the actions of nitric oxide that the pressure of oxygen in the blood is 10% higher with nose breathing versus mouth breathing. There was a study as well of a product called Sanotize, and I don't know anything about the company, and clinical trials looking at it for the efficacy of COVID, and it showed that it shortened the duration of the symptoms, etc. So the potential of nitric oxide as a gas to help with this condition is enormous. And I would point out people with long COVID. I was working with a few people last night with long COVID. It's a dreadful condition. Breath hold time, in the main, these people were really, really short of breath, laboured breathing. They had actually a low breath hold time, even though studies by Messino show that breath hold time can be much longer. Terrible condition. And giving them small breath hold exercise, what you spoke about earlier on, that breathe in and breathe out and hold the breath. Now, I only had them hold their breath for 2 seconds, because if I had them hold their breath for beyond 2 seconds, it would result in laboured breathing. So that's where they are at. And females predominantly, for some reason, young females, not typically the characterization that we feel, people with different health conditions. These were young, healthy, fit females before long COVID. So when people kind of tell me that long COVID doesn't exist, well, unfortunately we are seeing it. And from a breathing perspective, I think nitric oxide has a good application here, even though nobody's been talking about it.
Right. No, it's super interesting. I've only met a few individuals who have long haul COVID, and you're right. It's atrocious. I mean, I couldn't imagine living with that. And as somebody who did get COVID-19 back earlier this year, that would have been back in February, it was one of my biggest fears, to be honest with you. I wasn't super nervous about kind of the acute kind of transient symptoms I was experiencing. Like, obviously I didn't want to go to the hospital, but I wasn't as nervous about that. It was like when I lost my taste, I had, more difficulty with breathing, that I was like, oh my goodness, if this sticks around, forever, or for at least a long time, you conceptualize forever as humans, because, our minds like to go to the deepest, darkest places sometimes. It would be, really nerve wracking, but honestly, I attribute, my experience of kind of, I would say, minimal symptoms comparatively to others, especially respiratory symptoms, from being kind of all the practice and work that I've done, both on nasal breathing and then just training my lungs, training my diaphragm, training my nervous system as well to handle the high level of stress. And again, it's one of those things I'm very, grateful for. I'm very thankful for, but man, I couldn't even imagine, kind of the long haul symptoms. So yeah, if you have those, this is very interesting to focus on. But yeah, great. I'm going to transition us now from question one. Thanks, Alexandra. That was awesome. To our second question, which comes from Dom. Dom asks, I commit to engaging in sauna sessions 3 to 4 times a week. It gets quite boring in the sauna, so I was thinking about engaging in a breathwork practice. I'm assuming when he's saying like he's in the sauna. Is that okay, or are there downsides? I assume that breath holding is probably not a good idea in the sauna. So I'm going to give up a little bit of preliminary thoughts and ideas just because I do actually commit to 3 to 4 times a week in the sauna and enjoy it. I do about 20 to 25 minutes each time. I sit in a dry sauna, which gets, anywhere from about 200 degrees, 210 degrees max. That's Fahrenheit. And I do have a breathwork practice that I engage in when I'm in the sauna. And so I thought that this was a great question because I was like, oh, well, I'll tell you a little bit about what I do. And then I was very interested, Patrick, into hearing about, what you think, if there are any downsides, because again, I practice this and I want you to tell me if I'm doing something incorrect as well. But no, I love my sauna practice. And the reason is because I am also someone who I don't want to just sit there and kind of think. And it's not to say sitting and thinking is a bad thing, but I just like to be kind of killing more birds with one stone if I can. So I'll do journaling when I'm in the sauna. I have one of those Right in the Rain journals, which is an all-weather universal journal that you can get sweat and water on and will sustain from heat, really high conditions. So I'll journal, and then I'll also do anywhere from about 5 to 10 minutes of focused breathwork practices. They asked about breath holding. They said I assume breath holding is probably not a good idea in the sauna. I have never done breath holds in the sauna, and I can't imagine that's a good idea. But tell me what you think, Patrick. Is that okay? Are there downsides to breath work in the sauna? Is it a good idea? And what about breath holds in the sauna?
I suppose breath holds, you could be holding your breath for 5 seconds, or you could hold your breath for a minute. So it really depends. Do you hold your breath on the inhalation, or do you exhale and hold your breath? Interesting, the term heat and increased carbon dioxide, both are going to cause a right shift of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. And basically what this means is that hemoglobin is the main carrier of oxygen in the blood. So 98.5% of your oxygen is bound by hemoglobin, which is a protein within the red blood cells. And a catalyst for hemoglobin to release oxygen is increased temperature and increased carbon dioxide and drop to blood pH. So in the sauna, you've got that. In a sauna, you've got a combined approach. If you're doing breath exercises with the intention of reducing breathing volume, either by holding the breath or by slowing down and breathing light to take less air into your body, I would have a pulse oximeter in there. Now, I understand that moisture and pulse oximetry mightn't go together. I've used it with hot yoga because I was kind of intrigued just the basics of hot yoga. And you will see in a hot yoga studio that your blood oxygen saturation will drop down to about 93%. Now, this could be cause for concern for somebody who wouldn't necessarily be thinking about it, but it's never a cause for concern if you're inside in a hot environment or you're doing breath holding. Naturally, when you have an increased temperature and hemoglobin is releasing oxygen more readily, it's going to show a slight drop to your SpO2, which is your fraction of your hemoglobin occupied by oxygen. The only reason that your oxygen drops is because your hemoglobin is releasing oxygen to the tissues and organs. So it's a good thing. The increased carbon dioxide as a result of doing reduced volume breathing. So what you could do is taking a very soft and light, gentle breath in through your nose for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, totally silent, almost breathing imperceptibly for 3 or 4 seconds, and a really relaxed and a slow and gentle exhalation maybe for 5 or 6 seconds, and having it to the point that you feel air hunger, which tells you that your carbon dioxide has increased a little in the blood, and the body is very sensitive to an increase of carbon dioxide, so that's why you feel the air hunger. But knowing that when you're doing the practice that your hemoglobin is releasing oxygen more readily to where it's needed, so it could be a good practice for improving body oxygenation. Now, I don't see a downfall to it. Of course, you don't want to be holding your breath to the extreme. I wouldn't be doing hyperventilation and long breath holds because the hyperventilation is going to get rid of too much carbon dioxide. Then you can hold your breath for a long, long time because you don't feel the alarm to breathe, and the risk of passing out would be possible, and absolutely you don't want to pass out in the sauna. But gentle exercises, no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and that's kind of very similar to the way that I've looked at it. And again, like I also look at it in this way too. Like the reason that you are engaging in a sauna session, or at least most people nowadays, is because of the longevity effects of hormesis. So hormesis being kind of the stress to our bodies that can improve resiliency to stress and build the body in a stronger, more adaptive way. So what is kind of the predominant way that we see hormesis working out? It's exercise. And so actually sauna has been shown to demonstrate a very similar physiological effect to engaging in exercise. And I think the combo of exercise plus sauna, and then maybe even to cold exposure, which we're not necessarily going to get into today, can be quite effective in becoming more adaptive to the effects physiologically and psychologically of stress. And so I kind of actually view it this way. So I love the physiological effects that you mentioned just now. And I love that there is some even more, I guess we could say, amplified of effects of breath work within a sauna practice. But also too, a lot of people like will say, like, I get in the sauna and like my mind starts going and all I can focus on is like the pain. Like it's so difficult sometimes to just like sit there and sweat and be in the pain. And I have found that when I engage in a breathwork practice, because of all of what's happening to my physiology, like again, I start to embrace a lot more of the pain in a much more resilient way. So my breathwork practice within the sauna actually makes it feel like it's less stressful on the body because I'm engaging in something that's allowing my nervous system to slow down and to relax within the effects of the high intensity or of the significance of stress that I'm engaging in when I'm in the sauna. So I think it's a really great way of kind of combining both the hormesis of sauna, increasing sirtuin activity, increasing heat shot proteins, like increasing the anti-aging effects of the sauna, alongside with actually like helping to engage the nervous system to become more adaptive to what it's experiencing. So I think that's a lot of great effects, and I would agree with you too. Like the last place that you want to pass out, especially if you're alone, is in the sauna. So for me, I've never even done short breath holds. Like again, like you said, like there's probably some ability to do that or merit to do that depending on the person. But for me, I've just kind of stayed away from it just because I'm nervous about like passing out in the sauna and then like somebody finding me like way too late, and I've experienced a little bit too much stress because I passed out in the sauna. So you just got to be careful, know thyself, take it easy. But again, like if you want to kill two birds with one stone, sauna session plus a breathwork practice, I think that there's a lot of upside to that. Any other thoughts there, Patrick, or we're going to move on to the next one?
No, I would agree with you. I think it's yeah, go very, very gentle, nothing to the extreme.
Yeah, indeed. All right, thanks, Dom. All right, next question, which may end up being our last because we don't want to go too far over time, but we'll see kind of after we answer, this one, because there might be a little bit more explanation that need be had on this question. Cindy asks, my body oxygen level test is really bad. I am typically only getting about 12 or 13 seconds until I feel contractions in my throat. I'm just getting into focused breathing, but is there something I'm missing or should be focusing on first? What is the best way for me to increase my Bolt score? So a lot of things we probably need to unpack here for the listener who doesn't understand what Bolt score is, or, body oxygen level test. So, this is someone, Cindy, who's saying like, I've tested my Bolt score, which Patrick, I'll let you, explain. I've tested my Bolt score. It's really not that great, or at least she perceives it's not that great at 12 or 13 seconds. She's really just getting started into this. Like, what should she be focusing on? Like, what should she be like working on? And then how can she increase that score? So I know that this is a very, wide open question, and we could take it a lot of different ways. But Patrick, why don't you first just explain to us what the body oxygen level test is, how you derive that, and then kind of how can we help Cindy?
Sure, Jay. Body oxygen level test is simply the length of time that you can hold your breath for comfortably after an exhalation. So if you want to measure it, you take a normal breath in and out through your nose and pinch your nose with your fingers to stop breathing, and time it. How long does it take until you feel the first involuntary movement of the diaphragm? In other words, you might feel a jerk of your diaphragm, or you might feel a constriction in the throat, because your diaphragm breathing muscle is mechanically linked with the upper airway dilator muscles in the throat. And when you resume breathing, your breath should be fairly normal. So it's a comfortable breath hold time following an exhalation. Now, what does it mean? Well, if you have a low breath hold time, you typically have increased breathlessness during physical exercise. So if we're working with athletes, we would measure their Bolt score, and if they have a low breath hold time, we know that their breathing is holding them back. Their breathing can be, for any person, a low breath hold time is going to translate into faster breathing, harder breathing. They often feel air hunger. The people last night, for example, I had 3 people and their breath hold time was 4 seconds. 4 seconds. And, one was, 2 actually had long COVID. One was very, very severe asthmatic. And going through the very gentle breathing exercises, working to improve their Bolt score. So for Cindy, it's really, a 12 to 13 second Bolt score. I would be doing breathe light primarily. Physical exercise can be a problem because what can happen is that your breathing can get too hard and too fast for your given level of physical exercise. In other words, we as human beings, there's a certain volume of air that we need to breathe. And we need to match our breathing volume to our metabolic needs. But if we have a low Bolt score, we can have a habit of breathing too much air. Now, I know that some people might say, well, what's wrong with breathing too much air? There's a lot wrong with it. And the problem is that if you're breathing too much air, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide from the blood through the lungs. And as a result, your blood circulation is impaired or narrowed. Your oxygen delivery is affected. Your airways can be affected. But also, you can have increased sympathetic arousal because you're in that slightly faster breathing and harder breathing. So your sleep, your state of mind, your physical exercise can be impacted. Now, your Bolt score is influenced by a number of things. So maybe if somebody has asthma or if they had childhood asthma, that can affect their Bolt score. If there's any inflammation in your lungs, your Bolt score is affected. There's a cognitive effect to it as well. If people are holding their breath and they're feeling the air hunger, and if they have kind of an experience of trauma in their past or childhood separation, or for example, any predisposition towards panic disorder, that can affect their Bolt score. So working to increase it, what we do is we deliberately have the person breathe less air. And this could be just you're sitting down in a comfortable chair, you take your attention out of your mind and onto your breathing, and you really slow down the speed of the breath coming into your nose. And then you have a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And the purpose is to breathe about 30% less air into the body to the point that you feel air hunger. Now, I'd encourage everybody to give it a go because this was the one thing that drove it home to me. I remember 25 years ago practicing this, and I was able to improve the temperature of my fingers. I always had cold hands and cold feet. I had brain fog, and I never realized that by breathing less, it impacted my circulation. And then the more you practice gently slowing down your breathing and breathing a little bit less air, and it's not about breathing like this all day long. 10 minutes before you go to bed. That's what I did last night. I was just watching some light TV. I had my Leaf heart rate tracker on me, and I was practicing a combination of slow breathing with light breathing. 10 minutes, great way to down regulate. If you have 10 minutes following your lunch break, you're feeling maybe a little bit sluggish after food, close your eyes, bring your attention inwards, breathe less air. It's great for conservation of energy, but more importantly, it helps to improve your Bolt score because when you breathe light, this then becomes your pattern of breathing. Because bear in mind, people who have harder breathing and faster breathing, it's not a great sign of health. If somebody comes into your room or you see a staff member, and I often see it, with people when they get stressed and they start sighing more and they have irregular breathing, and straight off, you're wondering, here's a person who is reacting physiologically. They're getting stressed to a situation, and the situation could be minor. We shouldn't be getting stressed to the minor situations. And this is where our breathing can be very important, because if you're an employee working in the corporate place and you're there in the office and you're sighing and you have irregular breathing, you have to ask the question, how are other people interpreting that? And unconsciously, other people can be interpreting this, that you're a little bit maybe highly strung, or that you're not comfortable in your situation. You're not able to deal with the situation. and that could be marked against you. Always bear in mind, your breathing, if you're displaying your breathing so outright, people can pick up on that breathing pattern. And I think intuitively most people realize that when somebody is sighing more, that, they're feeling a little bit anxious or panic. Don't show that to your colleagues. Definitely don't go into a job interview and be sighing in front of the examiners or the interview board, because they're not going to reflect lightly on that. Hide your physiology too. Don't if you're feeling a little bit stressed, tap into your breathing and slow down the exhalation out through the nose. So coming back to Cindy, why would the bolt score be so low? Stress, I think, is a big one with human beings, especially adults. Talking, as you pointed out earlier on, Jay, talking is tiring, and especially because it can involve faster breathing and harder breathing. And people who talk for a living, they probably know that they are tired at the end of the day. They may not have put it down to the breathing, but it could be the breath that's the issue here.
Yeah, no, I agree with all the statements there. And, it's one of the things too, like I want Cindy to realize, and this is something that I deal with in the heart rate variability world, is that people get locked in on these numbers, like the 12 or 13 seconds, like that's, she considers it bad. She said it's really bad. And I think that that's probably not a great frame to start. Just like when I have people who email me and they're like, my heart rate variability is really bad. And I'm like, well, what does that actually mean? And then do you think that sets you into a position where you can't change? Like, no. Like, it may be lower than what you want and you may perceive it as being quote unquote bad, but it just means that we have a starting place and now we can work with it. And I like your focus on, the breathe light to breathe right exercise. Again, you should pick up the Oxygen Advantage book if you have not, that Patrick wrote, that does a couple things. Number one, it highlights how to engage in kind of finding your bolt score and then how to improve it through different exercises, one of them being the breathe light to breathe right exercise. And I like this idea because for me, like when I do breathe light exercising, I do not focus on necessarily the cadence of breathing. Like I don't have it paced or timed. I just really focus on kind of centering myself into my breath work practice and really focus on just slowing it down. And like, I love one of the examples that you always use, Patrick, is that when we're inhaling and exhaling, we do it, number one, quietly. We do it deep and we do it low. And then also too, we breathe so slow as to not move the nostril hairs in our nasal pathway. And I like that imagery because I use it still all the time, even though I've been practicing for quite some time now. And one of the great things too is, yes, you can use, body oxygen level test, the bolt score, as a good proxy. Another good thing for training too, if you just want to visualize it, is very similar to what you mentioned of what you did last night, is you put a heart rate variability device on and you watch the changes in heart rate variability. You may not notice significant changes initially, but you'll see them the more and more you practice and the more you become adaptive to what's going on kind of within your nervous system. So I love that, but there's definitely ways to increase that bolt score, but I think it just takes conscientious time and practice and just an effort to kind of make those changes on a daily basis. So great question, Cindy. I'm sure that we'll talk about the body oxygen level test or the bolt score plenty throughout our time here, but that's a really good focused question. So we had another question, but I think for the sake of time, just so that we don't go too long on our first podcast, I'll save the question number 4. So sorry, Jonathan, you asked us a question about muscular tension. We'll talk about that maybe in the next podcast. So I'm going to wrap up the questions for us today. Great work today, Patrick, in just providing some really good answers to these questions. And again, thank you all for submitting these questions to us. Like, I think that this is going to be a huge benefit on this podcast, is just to be able to talk through, provide practical suggestions for all the questions. So again, you can head on over to hanuhealth.com/podcast in order to submit your question, and maybe you'll get a response on air. And again, help yourself, help other people. So I'm going to wrap us up today. Patrick, it's been a blast, having this Q&A with you. Again, I think this is going to be just invaluable to people. I just want to, again, remind everybody, like, if you're interested in learning more about Hanu Health and what we have coming out in the health technology realm, go and visit hanuhealth.com/waitlist. Get your name on there. You'll get our newsletter. You'll hear all about our incentives, promotions, updates. You're not going to want to miss it. Like, we have something revolutionary coming out to market market that you guys are going to want if you're interested in breath work, heart rate variability, stress resiliency training. Like, it is going to be something that you are going to want to know about. So hanuhealth.com/waitlist. Also, follow us on Instagram. We have @Hanu Health is our handle. Also, Patrick's handles are @Oxygen Advantage. Again, that's @Oxygen Advantage. And then @Buteco Clinic. We'll put all these in the show notes. Again, hanuhealth.com/1. And then mine personally is @Dr. J. Wiles. You can find us on Instagram. Lastly, I'll wrap us up with saying that one of the fun things that we're going to have on these Q&A podcasts, we don't have it this time because you don't know about this giveaway, hint, hint. We're going to actually give away a gift package for 5-star reviews that we read on air. So how do you do this? You'll head on over to iTunes. So get on your phone, go to iTunes, and then write us a 5-star review. You can't just give us 5 stars. You have to actually write us a review, because if we read your review on air, we're going to send you a fun gift package with a water bottle, some stickers, and some other goodies. It's a nice water bottle too, an aluminum one with our logo on it. So again, just a 5-star review. We read it on air. And then also too, you get a gift package, but it also helps us to really grow this podcast, increases the algorithm on who finds us on iTunes. And so if you do that, we read it on air, then we will send you that fun gift package. You'll just have to email us at podcast@hanuhealth.com. That's podcast@hanuhealth.com with your name and address if we read it on air, and we'll send you out some fun goodies. Well, again, Patrick, it's been a blast, my friend. Looking forward to more of these. Thanks again, man, for coming on and answering some fun questions.
My pleasure. It was great. Thanks very much, Jay.
Yeah, indeed. All right, everybody, until next time, take care. And again, we hope to give you some more great content. So, all right, thanks, everybody. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Hanu Health Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. This podcast would not happen without listeners and supporters like you, and the best way to support us and the show is to head on over to iTunes and provide us with a 5-star review. This helps us reach others and spread the good word of breathing and stress resiliency. If we read your 5-star review on air, please reach out to podcast@hanuhealth.com with your name and mailing address, and we will send you some sweet Hanu gear. Until next time, breathe better and stress less.